All right, we should be good.
Great. Again, welcome everyone. July meeting of the Conservation Commission. Jamie, would you take roll call, please?
Sure. Dick.
Here.
Thank you. Rita.
Here.
Pete.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Randy.
Here.
Colleen.
Here.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Also in the room.
Also joining us are Angela Blanchette, our town engineer, Autumn Spear, planning
Great.
director, and Andrew Mackey from Scarborough Land Trust.
Terrific. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to start out this meeting with a land acknowledgement, honoring all Indigenous people, the people who came here before us and nurtured this place as stewards of Mother Earth, the first people. I make this acknowledgement aware that this land is unceded and that issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing in the Wabanaki homeland. I acknowledge the Owaskawag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough, and that as we support efforts for land and water protection, that we honor the current tribes who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. So we have the minutes from our last meeting in June, and I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Thanks, Pete.
Seconded.
I motion to approve.
Thanks, Jessica. Any discussion or changes do we want to acknowledge? Okay. All right, Jamie,
Sure.
please.
Dick, do you approve the minutes?
Pardon?
Do you vote to approve the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Rita.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
Jessica.
Yes.
Randy.
Yes,
Kathleen.
Yes.
Thank you.
thanks. So tonight's agenda, we're going to be talking about taking steps for ordinance development around freshwater wetlands and streams. And we'll have an update on stormwater challenges and low impact development practices, and updates from the education subcommittee and the good work that they've been doing. And then go through our regular updates. I don't know, we might have a short meeting, but we're here, we've planned to 7:30 if necessary. Any other things that we want to touch on before we move ahead with the planned agenda? Okay, do we have any public comment?
Yes.
All right, Andrew.
All right.
Sure. Thank you for letting me provide some comment. We've been doing a little work at the Land Trust office, looking at subdivision ordinances and zoning ordinances. And we looked at a couple from other places in Maine, and we actually found some that we support quite strongly from our neighbor, Cape Elizabeth. And Autumn, you probably have seen Cape Elizabeth's stuff, but I kind of wanted to bring it up with the Conservation Commission. I have 2 documents that I'll hand to Randy, so she can take them.
Thank you.
I can send them electronically too, but I do have an extra copy here if you want them.
Great.
And I just want to touch on a couple things that we strongly support. And we are in strong agreement with Cape Elizabeth's language for consideration for any revision of ordinances in Scarborough. First is the subdivision ordinance considers aesthetic, cultural, and natural values, including scenic, wildlife, natural features, and farmland, surface waters. I'm just going to read this quickly. whenever situated entirely or partially within the watershed of any pond, lake, or within 250 feet of any wetland, great pond or river as defined in Title 38, et cetera, et cetera. The proposed subdivision will not adversely affect the quality of that body of water or unreasonably affect the shoreline of that body of water. There's a lot of stuff in here that we've highlighted, but I'm not going to go through it all tonight because we want to keep it to a short meeting and not be here until 11 o'clock. Unless you want to kind of represent like your town council and have really long meetings.
No new items entertained after 10 p.m.
Another component in the subdivision ordinance for land donations is at least 20% of the land shall be land which is not resource protection zone or buffer and has see 15%. So they define not only kind of the stuff already protected, but they're saying, hey, you got developers, you got to add some other stuff besides the stuff that already falls under shoreline protection and resource protection and that kind of thing. Let's move on.
Andrew, pardon me, you are reading from?
I am reading from basically the subdivision ordinance of Cape Elizabeth and the zoning ordinance. The subdivision ordinance is 16-3-1. And the zoning ordinance is section 19-7-2, open space zoning.
Okay, thank you.
See, they define contiguous land, which is something too that I think we could benefit from. To the greatest extent possible, open space shall be conserved in large contiguous blocks, narrow strips of open space. For example, extended strips of open space of less than 50 feet in width shall not be included in open space design unless they provide public access connectors, Greenbelt Trail, for example, to nearby public open space, wildlife corridors, or links to neighborhoods that would benefit from the use of open space to be preserved. Let's see, it goes into some standards, including permanent legal protection, and kind of defines permanent legal protection. And so that's something I think that we could also benefit strongly from, of having open space kind of having these standard requirements that give them that permanent protection. Maintenance. I'll just read this quickly. If the land is in residential development to be preserved as open space is not deeded to the town or the land trust. They refer in this both to the town of Cape Elizabeth and to the Cape Elizabeth Land Trust. Documentation shall be submitted identifying the party responsible for maintaining the open space and describing the methods to be employed to maintain the open space. That's a huge problem because homeowners associations typically don't have any plan or any designation of who's going to do any work in those open spaces. And then the last one I'm going to read is open space. At least 45% of the gross acreage shall remain as open space outside of the building footprints, parking areas, and other developed areas, excluding open space improvements, and any areas assigned to individual dwelling units. At least 1/3 of this required open space shall be land that is usable as determined by applying the criteria of the net residential area definition. So we just wanted to bring this to the Conservation Commission's attention because we think there's some good stuff in here that we can learn from and steal. So.
Fantastic, thank you. That's really helpful, and we'll definitely circle back to that in our upcoming conversation. And yeah, so I'll wait till on that. Any other, that was really helpful, Andrew. Any other updates from the Scarborough Land Trust you want to share?
Randy, you got a copy of our new map.
Map, yes.
I hope you'll consider sharing with everyone on the Conservation Commission. We sent the same map to Sue for Parks and Conservation Open Space Land Board, and hopefully she'll share that with everyone on that board. And it's gone to appropriate town staff and various partners and things like that. We keep trying to refine that map. Really trying to get it to a point of, well, what is conserved, permanently conserved, what is open space, but maybe not necessarily conserved, what is active recreation areas, what are natural areas, conservation easements, various things like that. So I think we've done a pretty good job of working with our GIS contractor, and we work with Micah, of course, and try to make sure that our data and the town's data matches up as best that we can do. And so that's one big thing. We have another request for town land bond funding going in front of the town council that has been recommended by the Parks and Conservation Land Board. That will go in front of them. I think it's the 19th is the next meeting. Is that right, June?
Yeah.
That's a Thursday, yep.
Wednesday,
Oh, so.
But Wednesday.
18th.
Wednesday.
unless they moved it. I have it written down.
The 19th is a Wednesday, okay.
And so we're asking money for that project, which is 11 acres. We just got approval for the 30-acre project now that we have to go out and raise the rest of the money, about $120,000 for. So we're working on that. And we're getting ready to bring another request to the Parks and Conservation Land Board.
Fantastic.
Can you share with the 11 acres that you're going?
So the 11 acres is the address in the town is 00 Gorham Road, but it's actually off of Finch Way. It's the end of Finch Way. It's undeveloped. And it abuts Warren Woods. But more importantly, the southern half of the property is Pitch Pine Bog, which is a rare community type S2 in the state of Maine. That Pitch Pine Bog is mostly on Warren Woods, but this is a really beautiful southern piece of that. Parks and Conservation Land Board has asked us to do a walk out there so that they could see it, and probably do it in the fall, maybe once the bugs are a little better. And so I'm happy to open that up to the Conservation Commission too, if anyone would like to join on that walk. It's really good habitat out there. It's just something you have to have an eye for. You'll want to see natural habitats the way they're supposed to be, but just to see kind of that dispersed pitch pine community with a very strong shrub layer and boggy sphagnum understory is kind of special.
Nice. Thank you, Andrew. The map, thank you for that. I'm going to post that to our shared folder for the Conservation Commission. And I also just posted a PDF copy of the Cape Elizabeth subdivision ordinance in the shared folder, so that we can all reference that as well. So thank you. Before we get into the ordinance discussion, we do have a new item on the agenda, which is correspondence to the commission. We've fielded a few notes, letters, pictures. And it was enough interesting correspondence from residents of Scarborough that we wanted to bring those forward to for the commission to hear. So Jamie, I'll turn this part over to you.
Sure. So over the past month or so, we've received 3 correspondence from folks in town. Some we know who the sender is, one we don't. That's the one I'll start with. This one was addressed to Randy and left with us in the planning department regarding the Rock Church. And there was a concern that there was parking lot runoff that was bypassing the on-site stormwater treatment facility and flowing directly into Millbrook. And so staff are working with the landowner to address that issue and get that site back into compliance, because the runoff is supposed to go to treatment and not directly to the stream. Another one was from a resident regarding Ash Swamp Road. Actually, this one came from, oh no, that's the other one I was thinking of. Okay, so a resident regarding Ash Swamp Road, she was concerned that the road runoff from Ash Swamp Road was eroding the gravel shoulder adjacent to Merrill Brook. The Public Works Director has been in contact with the landowner, and Public Works went out and stabilized the shoulder with crushed stone. So hopefully it will not erode as easily as the gravel shoulder will. With all of the rain that we've gotten this year, unfortunately, there's a lot of gravel shoulders eroding. So that is not an uncommon occurrence currently, and Public Works is addressing those as they can. And the last one actually was brought to our attention from Marla. It's Mitchell Hill Road. There was runoff from road work that was going into a stream, and staff worked with our town inspector and the contractor on the site, addressed the issue within 24 hours, I believe, to address that one. So those were the 3 issues that have folks reached out with since our last meeting. If there are any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, we can move on to our ordinance discussions.
Maybe just an acknowledgement that these 3 were different locations and they were all concerns about runoff, yes?
Yes.
And related to Public Works Department needing to inspect those sites, is that? No.
Not so much Public Works. No, so the town does have, we employ contracted inspectors, and we also have an inspector on staff. One of the issues our inspector did identify, that was the one that Marla reached out to us about. And the contractor just hadn't gotten to it. The inspector made them aware that it was an issue. But they hadn't gotten to it yet. And so Marla reached out again. She initially reached out to Public Works, and then she reached out to Randy and myself. And so I think it was just a matter of timing that our inspector also went out, took a look at it, and the contractor, it was on their schedule at that point to address the issue. Angela, do you want to say anything more about that or does that cover it?
Yeah, no, it just, it's helpful, yeah, we get, I would say, calls or concerns about many things around town, and it's just, having more eyes, that's all. So this was, I would say, no different. It was already on the radar, though, it just hadn't got to yet. And the other one with the Rock Church is, again, it was a private site, so we're not necessarily going on to private sites and looking around in their parking lot unless we get a complaint. And so now it has just put on our radar to get in there and kind of educate and help them through the process, because I think that's where they're at. There was nothing intentionally done. It was more of now staff trying to help them through a process and educate them on what needs to be done. That's pretty much it. So neither of those were really specifically related to Public Works.
Okay, excuse me for misstating that. And is this, are Are there any themes or learnings from this, or is sort of this is business as usual for town staff to receive and
Nothing's,
respond?
I would say this June is not usual.
Yeah,
The amount of rain we've had, this is 3 of, like I said, of many complaints that our department, Public Works Department, are in the planning office with code are addressing all over town. It's just making sure that we're, people are following up and kind of making sure things are stable. The amount of rain though it's pretty unprecedented, so.
yeah,
And I will say it, you know, speaks to the fact that the Conservation Commission is becoming a more well-known entity in town, that people are thinking to reach out to this group with those concerns. Ultimately, it's likely to be staff that handles those concerns, but I would say if people want to reach out to this group, they're welcome to. It may not be the most efficient means of lodging a complaint, since, like I said, it will be staff that are likely the ones to address the issues.
right, thank you.
Pete has his hand up.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just a kind of a follow-up question for staff. I mean, it's unusual now, but this is something that is not unexpected. And we're going to be seeing more high-intensity, short-duration precipitation events that are going to be stressing a lot of our infrastructure. And a lot of these kinds of things are going to be coming up, I would suspect, moving into the future. And I'm just wondering if that's something that's being thought about and thinking about moving forward in terms of planning for this kind of stuff. Might be a loaded question, so just that's my comment. It's more. It's not really a question.
Well, I mean, I can't comment.
You
I would
may.
say that, I would say, over, I would say the past decade or more, there's been a lot of things put in place through the ordinance or through our stormwater permit that does gear up for making sure everybody's in compliance. Because I mean, obviously you guys have seen the old subdivisions in the 80s and 90s. You build the stormwater pond and then it's forgotten. And then you're like, oh, that group of trees over there, that used to be a stormwater pond, right? I think those days are gone with the new requirements. And I think that's why we're putting more and more of those in place, where you're kind of being proactive. And when you're putting in facilities and when you're stabilizing sites, you're doing it in a way that's sustainable, right? And then it's for the longevity. I think you're right. Eventually, we're just going to need more eyes and more staff around to address some of the issues, because you can't have a site that's stable forever. And so making sure we're educating and making people aware of their property as they come through the planning office with their development, what that means that they're taking on for responsibility and liability for their site, is I guess where we're kind of trying to lay the groundwork.
And then I want to add, also related to town infrastructure, the town council did fund a vulnerability assessment in this fiscal year's capital improvement plan. So we'll be looking at town infrastructure and identifying vulnerabilities and ways that we need to be improving our infrastructure and planning for the future. So yes, it's.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I was reminded of another piece of correspondence from a resident who actually first reached out to two town councilors, Jean Marie, Katerina, and Karen Shoup, with an interest in a property that was, trying to get this right, was recently is about to be sold or is in process of being sold, with the hopes that Conservation Commission members may see the wisdom in preserving this land and may orchestrate its purchase to that end. So again, speaking to the commission's public's greater awareness of our role here in town, it was reviewed against the beginning with habitat layers, and the Scarborough Land Trust took a look at it, and folks responded, but that was just, I just wanted to update everyone. That was another type of correspondence that we've received. So, so the next piece is the topic, the main topic for this evening, which kind of is timely given the last, this round of discussions around runoff. And that is, around buffer requirements for freshwater wetlands, streams, and rivers. So what I said in our last meeting is that we would come to this meeting having reviewed what's out there and proposed some language. I got as far as collecting a range of resources and documents around ordinance language, buffer protection zones, and I got to a couple of Maine-based towns or Maine towns and their examples. I didn't get Cape Elizabeth, so big thanks to Andrew for bringing Cape Elizabeth's example, which I then posted into that shared drive for everyone. And so given that that's where we are right now, the reason that we're discussing ordinances is so that we and the planning team, volunteer and staff have some kind of heft to be able to review applications for subdivision or other kinds of land use development that protect these waterways. And, this could be a buffer width. It could be, contiguous land protection. And it could also incorporate a fee structure, an impact fee structure. So I believe Autumn and Angela are here to hear and support hear what the Conservation Commission members have to say and support us in developing potential language to move forward with an ordinance. So I want to sort of open that up to everyone to get your thoughts and perhaps some direction on where we want to start with. My sense was we want to go for something specific and concise so that we can move that forward and it can be applied in a number of different areas. That being specifically in my mind, the buffer protection zone. Pete.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but before I share those thoughts, I wanted to actually pose a question to planning staff, because they've been seeing a lot of this stuff over the years. And I guess my question is historically, where have we seen the most encroachments into wetlands, or where buffers are not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? In other words, they're providing inadequate protections for our wetlands. And when I say wetlands, then that's the whole gamut really of things, but I think most of my biggest focus is on the Scarborough River and its tributaries. But no, what has been most inadequate about our current protections for wetlands?
I haven't been here very long, but I think what I see is that it has to do with residential subdivisions. That seems to be like, okay, it's wetlands, that's not your yard, you don't develop in it. And then over the years, it just sort of morphs into the yard and the wetlands get taken away. That's kind of what I've seen.
That's when they're in place, right?
Right.
So so that's what I was thinking too, as you were talking, is that we see a lot of neighbors, pointing fingers at their neighbors saying, aren't they just not supposed to be over there? So that's how we find out about it. But that's because there's a buffer in place. There's a lot of areas that don't have a buffer in place, and that's the commercial districts. So commercial development will develop a parking lot or infrastructure right up to the line. So there is zero protection. So there's two different things, right? There's one is the residential, they don't know what they have. And then in the commercial, there is nothing.
protecting the wetlands.
Yeah, and for the residential, Angela has pointed it out to me that over the years, we've allowed the buffer areas to be included in individual ownership, and it should just really be common ownership. And then it can be at least protected and you know it.
Right, at least people have
At least
more
it-
awareness of
because-
what they own.
Land changes
Right.
hands and you
Right.
don't know, and
Right.
I mean, there is some validity in that, but yeah.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Because I mean, we have such a focus on large commercial development in town that it seems to me that might be an area where we could certainly strengthen some things. If everything's basically just going straight to, you know, the line as it is. And then it sounds like we definitely need to focus on stronger protections for understanding where these buffers actually have been established. And then somehow providing some additional protections to them, if not, you know, also considering making our buffers a little bit wider. And I have some thoughts on that, but I want to let other folks chime in as well. Thank you for that input.
Well, I know, I just wanted to mention when you said, so I've only been here 8 years, but I know from day one, that was something that I thought the planning staff had brought to Conservation Commission, asking for help on that with the residential piece. Just, is there a way to know where the wetland lines are, where they shouldn't be encroaching? And so I guess that's been, I would say, an ongoing issue for a very long time. Be helpful to have this group chime in, I guess.
And I will say, I've seen the planning board do some specific things, but it's sort of hit or miss, right? So they'll require pins or fence post or some sort of delineation, but it seems to me that we should have something very specific. Maybe there's 3 different options that are appropriate, but those are the 3. And that way it gets to be a known behavior and everyone knows what it actually means. But right now it's very vague. So we could definitely straighten that up really easily.
Jessica, thank you.
Well, I guess I'm wondering a bit on our role is, can technology help us? Could we be using GIS to monitor the landscape change over time? I think, you know, there's a lot of new technologies out there and the information is a lot cheaper than it used to be. Can we use, you know, aerials to see where these lines are and what's happening or not happening? And could we have a role in reviewing those lines?
So Jessica, do you mean like an annual review based on, I mean, I don't know how often Scarborough updates its aerial imagery. Are you talking like an annual review of buffers and what's happening in those? I mean, they're sometimes a little bit difficult with vegetative cover.
Right, yeah.
Inside certain areas, depending on when flights are done, but I think you bring up a good point that maybe there's better techniques now, or better ability to actually get at what we're talking about.
So when I talked to Micah, related to Parks and Land Conservation Board, PCLB, he said that there's now an ability to look at impervious surface on an annual basis. And I know that vegetation and impervious surface are very different things, but that the costs have come down through the technologies that, and it might not be annually. I mean, annually is quite often, and you know, you get a rainy June and they do the imagery and everything looks green. I mean, I understand that vegetation's harder than impervious surface, but there could be ways that we automate some of this monitoring so that we have a better sense of what's happening or not happening, or where the real challenges are happening.
So I guess that would be my question, is what you're trying to accomplish from it, which, well, I get the bigger picture, but I'm thinking of code officers and staffing. The first time you do that, it might be.
I
You might
wasn't so
another
much.
staff person.
Yeah,
If it's
yeah.
about
You
enforcement,
might
right?
find all the problems, but do we want to proactively go and enforce those issues? And then I come from it from more of like, we have two problems. So we have ordinances for new things that we can fix pretty easily. The ongoing existing issues are probably a different.
It was more not, it was not about enforcement. It was like, is perception matching reality? Where are things falling short?
Gotcha.
What are our highest priorities ordinance wise and going into the future? I don't mean like giving people tickets or,
Gotcha, using it more for data.
but more,
Gotcha.
we're taking the data to help us to focus our efforts on what are the highest priorities moving forward, rather
That's
than
good. Gotcha.
penalizing. You know, it sounds like some of this is like neighbors are reporting each other, or you know, versus like, okay, so can we take a more quantitative approach to understand what the biggest risks are? Especially if, I mean, it sounds like there's also an infrastructure review. I think that sort of all goes together. We have limited resources and we should focus them to the highest priority challenges.
So I'll jump in again if nobody else wants to. So maybe it makes sense for us to focus on the existing language as it relates to the existing protections of some of our most valued wetlands, and look at how we could strengthen those. And one example I'm thinking of is, I have it jotted down here. No, I can't find it. Of course. Under principal and accessory structures, even in the resource protection zone, you can decrease the vegetated buffer down to 25 feet for parking areas and things like that. At least that's my understanding of the regs when I read them. So maybe I'm not interpreting them properly. But to me, that's something that might be pretty easy to pinpoint and potentially strengthen. So maybe we kind of work on identifying where some of these low-hanging fruit improvements are first, or like the ones that are really kind of glaring. You mentioned commercial development and no buffers, and that in residential development, it's very difficult to actually figure out where those buffers are over long periods of time. So maybe those are the two things we kind of get at in moving forward with this.
Do you have specific ideas or recommendations, Pete, for buffer zone measurements?
Well, I was thinking, I mean, we have pretty good language out there, at least my understanding of what setbacks are supposed to be in certain areas, especially resource protection areas. Where things get a little bit hazier for me is actual vegetated buffers. And I consider myself a fairly educated person, and it's pretty hard to go through our shoreline zoning ordinances and actually understand what applies to where. I can now see why everybody has to hire a consultant to go and understand something, because it's almost impossible to understand. And I know that's the way ordinances are written, and to me, there's a big
They don't
underlying,
need to be that way.
there's a big underlying problem to that. But I mean, to me, we should have nothing that's 25 feet. That's not enough of a buffer in any of the areas that we're supposed to be caring about. So to me, that would be something that we would want to increase, unless it's specifically in one of those areas where we want to focus high density development of some kind. And even then, in our commercial areas, we should be establishing some kind of vegetated buffer, especially if it is adjacent to some of our high value areas. I'm thinking, for instance, to me, one of the most glaring issues that popped up in the last 10 years is Nonsuch River Brewing. And that went in right on the creek, on the Nonsuch River. And it has a parking lot that goes to a steep slope that just sheds stuff right down into the river. And I don't know how that happened, but to me, that was a glaring issue of the need for us to establish larger buffers associated with those kind of developments.
If we were to take that as an example, in terms of the ordinances that they complied with to be approved, then we need to, if we could turn back time, meaning we're going to start from here on forward, but if we could turn back time and rewrite those ordinances to disallow that kind of encroachment, what would they say, right?
That's a good question.
Well, because I guess I have to, correct a little bit here, because when we went through the site plan process for Nonsuch, I know the planning board did struggle with that one. But the Nonsuch does have protections around it that they're up against is a tributary. So this is where we're talking about. Do we want to extend to the tributaries, right? Because it is right
Absolutely.
upstream of the Nonsuch, but it's not protected because it wasn't the Nonsuch protection, right? It's a tributary. So that's a good point, is saying if that's what you guys want, maybe that's the direction you go, is try to protect some of those. And they do actually have their stormwater treatment between them and the tributary. But to your point, they went right up to the line because they're allowed to, right?
They complied. I'm not saying they didn't comply, but that to me was the example, and that lends itself to, we need to be establishing protections not only for these water bodies themselves, but also their tributaries, because the health of the water body depends on the health of the tributaries. And if all the tributaries are developed completely up to the lines, there's siltation that's going to be occurring. There's erosion of the banks that's going to be occurring that leads to more siltation, which leads to degraded water quality, which then impacts the areas that we are trying to protect, and then you can't protect them. So maybe that puts a focus on it there, right there, that we need to have stronger protections for the actual tributaries to the water bodies that we identify very specifically, that need to be protected. So that would be increased setbacks and increased buffers right there over what we have right now, which I think is 25 feet.
Let me
Depending on where you're located.
Oh, Jessica. Thank you, Pete.
I mean, is it as, I'm gonna use this word, simple as saying, the identified water bodies and their tributaries, can we add a couple of words and, that's done, or does it need to be more specific, or do you need anything else from the Conservation Commission?
All of it, does it matter if it's closer?
Or would you say the watersheds? Are you identifying watersheds?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever the language used to be, it does seem like it could be a straightforward fix.
Yeah, my only concern is we call out specific areas of, it's not on the board, it's not just because in those tributaries, there are different protection districts, if I'm understanding correctly. There's the stream protection district, there's the stream protection 2 district, and then there's the overall shoreland zoning overlay, and then there's the RP. And in some of those different areas, depending on where you are, it can also impact decreasing those buffers. So I don't know if just adding tributaries is enough. Maybe getting rid of those other sections and adding tributaries would be enough.
Right, simplifying, so there's not this hierarchy, it's just the buffer, the main stem buffer, and then adding in their tributaries.
The intent is just to make the tributary have the same size buffer as the actual water body itself, right? They match. Okay.
Randy, Andrew had his hand up.
Oh, excuse me, Andrew.
Thank you. I don't want to complicate things, but I will. If you look at almost all the streams and rivers, with the exception of the Nonsuch, the headwaters of all those are in Scarborough. And they're almost all forested wetlands. That's really the start of all this water that flows through all these streams and rivers. And anything you put in those headwater wetlands end up in those streams, whether it's silt or petroleum products or other runoff materials or whatever. So, I mean, I'm just encouraging you guys to think about how the whole system works. And you can see it on a map. I mean, you can see these streams end, and there's the little wetland symbols of where all that water comes from all summer long for those streams.
So that lends itself to that watershed concept approach. So, lost my train of thought.
And right now, is it correct that if somebody wanted to use land that included one of these wetlands, they can infill it with DEP approval following a certain process? Is that correct? I guess,
Yes.
Angela.
Yep, yes.
Yeah. So that is, I'm sensing something we want to undo.
Well, they can fill it to a certain amount, right?
Pardon me?
They can fill it to a certain amount. I don't think you can just fill 10 acres of wetlands. There's an acreage limit, isn't there? Please correct me if I'm wrong, planning staff.
Well, there's tiers, right? So you go through the different tiered approach, which just means more permitting and more cost. But you can, 10 acres is a lot. Yes, no, it's not, but you can get up to like 1 acre threshold, and then there's a 3 acre threshold. Those are all different permitting tiers, so you can fill quite a bit.
Would it-
As long as you're willing to mitigate.
As long as you're willing to mitigate or write a check, a very large check, yes. It gets
Yeah,
more
and-
expensive.
And one thing, so one thought I have on that is, I don't know if that lends itself to the concept of mitigation banking or whatever, but or they're paying into MNRCP, I guess that's what they're doing. But you know, those programs are decent, but very commonly the impact is local, and then the solution, quote unquote, is not in the community where the impact is. And that's something that I think is a glaring problem, especially in Scarborough, given, you know, we have a lot of impacts from this filling that's occurring. The funds get paid, and then those funds go into different projects, but they could be elsewhere in the state. They don't have to be in Scarborough, correct? So
We have one for Red Brook. Red Brook, we do.
Okay.
We do payments come locally, and actually even because Scarborough holds that program, even development in the south in South Portland on the other side of the line, but they're in the Red Brook watershed, pay
Yeah.
the town of Scarborough for their wetland impacts in the Red Brook watershed.
okay,
But that is the only watershed we have that in place.
But just to clarify, MNRCP, the state is broken up into regions.
yeah,
So any impacts in southern Maine go into a southern Maine pool, which is much bigger than Scarborough, but it theoretically are spent within that southern Maine region.
right. So I guess
That's
that itself right there could potentially be an issue. But would we have would the town have legal standing to limit, for instance, the amount of wetlands that can be filled if these wetlands are associated with a tributary to these major watersheds in Scarborough, Nonsuch River, Dunstan Creek, Libby, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Trying to think of another municipality where they've.
Where we just say, no, you cannot fill more than 1 acre. I don't know.
I don't know if any town has done that. I don't know.
By law, and again, I'm not an
Yeah.
attorney, but by law, local governments can be more restrictive.
Right.
They can't be
Yes.
less restrictive.
Right, but you can't.
So, I mean, there are examples in other places, like I know in New York, there's a lot of townships that have their own wetland regulations and even their own wetland inspectors, which are much more restrictive than New York State DEC or the US Army Corps of Engineers.
But yeah, I don't know any instances in Maine where a municipality has taken that on, so I'm not sure if it's legal.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can look into
Oh,
it. It feels
yeah.
like, it seems to me, that's one of the reasons or opportunities for a conservation commission. Why we exist and that the state doesn't do that kind of thing statewide.
And that could be a good question for the town attorney to follow up on.
And
Yeah,
what
we
could
will.
be what could be the opposition to something like that?
Property rights, money.
Well, to saying what Pete was saying, something like can't fill more than an acre or some kind of restriction on that. What would be the opposition?
Yeah,
Could
could be
be.
developers.
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 Properties.
Yeah.
And the property owners,
Property,
you're
yeah.
restricting their abilities to, that they might have purchased a property thinking they were gonna do a certain development and now they are not able
Right.
to.
Kathleen's had her hand up. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thanks. I didn't want to interrupt. I don't know if you can hear me clearly. My internet's kind of in and out. Okay. I'm wondering, just thinking about what Andrew shared in the beginning from the Cape Elizabeth ordinance, and I'm really new to like ordinance working, so I don't know. I don't know very
We
much
all are.
about this piece. But but I'm wondering also, given that we have now this.
Well, now you froze.
Uh-oh.
Me? No, it's her.
No, we lost her.
Sure.
There she is.
Maybe turn off your
Okay.
camera.
I'm going to stop my video. Yes. Okay, is that better? No. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
Okay. I'll try again. Given that we have this push toward greater conservation of greater percentage of land, could we take advantage of that and try to build in contiguous habitat around water? You know, like, is there an opportunity to use
I
so
think we've lost you
connect
again.
habitats again? All right.
So that sounds, I think if I'm understanding it, and Kathleen, please let me know if not. So that's interesting, sort of, oh, thanks, Kathleen. She's going to put it in the chat. Looking at this as a large reason why we're approaching this is to protect contiguous habitat around watersheds, headwaters, and tributaries into our major waterways.
And I just want to add in also that I think a lot of the concepts that we're talking about, the town, we may get to through our low impact development ordinance. And so we're kind of looking at this as a two-pronged approach. What are some small changes that we can make now that will have a big impact while we work through the process of our low impact development ordinance? And so just to kind of keep that in mind, because I don't want to get us too in the weeds here when I think the goal was to find some low hanging fruit that we can move on sooner rather than later.
Okay. Jessica, oh, I thought you had your hand up.
I was gonna say exactly what Jamie just said.
Excellent.
She said it better though. Because I feel like it's a two-pronged approach. I agree, you know, that there could be some small changes to the buffer requirements that could have a lot of impact now, and the longer term changes would sort of fall into that low impact development ordinance, which I think is going to be it's going to take longer and be much more detailed effort.
Thank you. And Autumn, what what detail would you need from us to feel like you've got enough to help us with ordinance language on the straightforward, low-hanging fruit side of things? We've talked about a lot, but what are those things that you need to hear from us?
I think I already have it. Like, I think you guys just want to increase your buffers to
Yep.
match. You want to take into account the whole watershed, not just, I think we have it. what we
Okay,
need.
awesome. That's
And
fantastic.
then I'll follow up with legal about the wetland fill, question. I sort of feel like it's probably like Andrew said, like we can always go further, but no one does. And I'm not sure, but I'll double check on that.
Okay,
I think we can give you some red lines to respond to pretty quickly.
fantastic. Thank you. That would make such a huge difference.
I think I know what you want, so.
Okay, that's great. So important and much better than the alternative of having to clean up what's already been damaged, or more streams and brooks that have been damaged and at risk. Well, thank you all. Any other further discussion on this before we move into, Jamie, do you want to talk about stormwater challenges and low impact development?
Yep, so I have a couple slides just to share, because I'm not
Great.
sure where everyone is in terms of streams and stormwater and things like that. And I think the discussion that we've been having has kind of set the stage for this. So I'll probably breeze through most of it. And then we'll talk a little bit kind of setting the stage for low impact development, because that is the ordinance that planning staff and engineering and technical services staff are going to be focusing on over the next 12 months, since we are required as part of our state stormwater permit to have an ordinance in place by July 1, 2024. So I'm just gonna share my screen, maybe, hopefully. Might take me a minute. It's always a challenge with PowerPoint and Zoom. So here. All right. Can you see that on Zoom?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm gonna move you out of the way so everyone's not looking at you. All right. So streams, stormwater, and low impact development. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Can I advance now? That's the next question. I'm like, oh, where's my screen to advance? Here we go. All right, so I wanted to start and just like orient us with what our watersheds are in town. We've talked a lot about the Nonsuch, which, as we all know, is up here, includes 8 corners. I also want to point out the town's 3 urban impaired streams. The first one is Long Creek, which I'm not going to touch on because there's a whole lot of work happening there, and we only have a very small portion of the watershed right here. But if you want to know what's happening in Long Creek, you can visit restorelongcreek.org and get all of the information you could possibly want about what's happening in that watershed. We also have Red Brook. We've talked a lot about Red Brook, both with the Turnpike connector going in, and as Angela mentioned, we have it's called a compensation fee utilization plan that lets us collect mitigation funds for any development that impact wetlands within that watershed. And the town will also be working on an update to the Red Brook Watershed Management Plan coming up starting this fiscal year as well. That was also funded by the town council in our most recent municipal budget. And then Phillips Brook is our other impaired stream that covers a good part of Dunstan Corner. And so when we say streams are impaired, DEP is the one that makes that determination, the Department of Environmental Protection. It's based largely on what they call aquatic life standards. So basically whether indicator insects that live in the stream are able to survive. And in these three watersheds, the specific bugs that they want to see in the stream are not there. And so it's believed that pollution from urban development, so roads, buildings, parking lots, is washing pollution into the streams. And that's why these critters are not able to survive. We also have two threatened streams. You only technically see one of those watersheds on your screen. It's Millbrook. Half of Millbrook is actually considered also Willowdale Brook. So it's kind of one and the same. And that the Downs is within the Millbrook watershed, as is Oak Hill, the municipal campus. And so these are streams that are showing signs of stress. So they're currently still meeting, the bugs are there that need to be there. The other water quality indicators are okay, but there's a declining trend. So a downward trend on those. And they may be listed as impaired in the future, or we can take steps so that it doesn't get to that point. Now, talking about stormwater, we've talked about it a lot. I just want to give a quick definition that it's runoff, so rain or melted snow that flows over the land, plus anything that is carried along with it. The stuff that's carried along with it is the pollution. So the biggest pollutant in the state of Maine by volume is actually soil. You're seeing construction runoff or tracking from a construction site down here that can get into our streams. Trash is lesser. It's a very visible pollutant, but less of a concern than some of the others. Lawn care products like fertilizers and weed and bug killers, pet waste, and winter salt are all also considered stormwater pollutants, as are metals that are often on our parking lots because of car exhaust and things like that.
Jamie, would you say generally animal waste? So not only pets, but farm animals too?
Yes, except for with farm animals, typically they're required to have a like a nutrient management plan, and working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service to have basically a manure management plan. So pet waste is a bigger issue, I believe, than agricultural. Not to say that there aren't awful sites out there where agricultural waste is an issue, cows in a stream and things like that. But just in terms of how common things are, pet waste is probably the bigger issue.
Thank you.
So the town has some stormwater related ordinances currently that try to deal with some of this stuff. And I want to just point out also that on the meeting agenda and upcoming dates, there is a planning board workshop scheduled for next week's planning board meeting that is going to focus on these two ordinances. And the Conservation Commission is welcome to attend. So these ordinances are Chapter 419, our post-construction stormwater infrastructure management. And this basically requires newer development. So development that has occurred since around 2008, 2009. They are required to report to us on an annual basis, saying that a qualified professional has inspected their stormwater systems and they are functioning, and to document any maintenance that is needed and to complete that maintenance in a timely manner. Our ordinance was just updated to require maintenance occur within 60 days of it being identified. Prior to that, it was fairly open-ended. And so it was a lot of work for staff to get people to comply and complete their maintenance in a timely manner. The other ordinance was just passed this spring, Chapter 420. It's our erosion and sedimentation control at construction sites ordinance. Really aims at dealing with that construction site tracking that I showed you on the last slide. So preventing soil from leaving construction sites. Prior to this ordinance, the town really relied on state regulations, but we didn't have much authority to enforce state laws. So this gives us local control over erosion control practices during construction. All that to say that we're doing a pretty good job during construction, and we're doing a pretty good job making sure stuff is functioning after construction. But let's talk about how stormwater is impacting as we plan for this development, and that's where our low impact development ordinance comes into play. So just a quick overview of low impact development, or LID. It's a broad approach to site planning that preserves natural resources, the processes, and important habitats, defines what portions of a site are suitable for development, and uses stormwater treatment measures to manage runoff from impervious areas. And the overall goal is to minimize the environmental impact of development. So this ordinance will likely result in developers needing to do a whole lot more pre-planning as they are planning their development and looking at their site in a completely different way than they may be currently. General LID principles include minimizing impervious surfaces, so pavement and roofs primarily, roads, parking lots, roofs, setting minimum open space requirements, treating runoff as close to the source as possible, so no longer piping runoff to a kind of centralized treatment area, those stormwater ponds that Angela mentioned earlier. Prioritizing the use of natural vegetation for stormwater treatment over engineered systems, and minimizing soil disturbance and compaction. So those are kind of like the high level things that this LID ordinance will be looking to address. There may be some other kind of smaller things that we'll be trying to get at, but in general, those are the upper level things that we're trying to achieve. And so we have some next steps. So as staff, we have an internal timeline that we're hoping to hit so that we can achieve that, having the ordinance in place by July 1, 2024. So we're currently working on a draft ordinance and hope to have it ready for review by Conservation Commission and the Long Range Planning Committee in early fall. We anticipate a public meeting late fall, probably November. There will be times kind of interspersed in here for review and comment, but the goal is to have Conservation Commission and Long Range Planning Committee reviews complete by early 2024 so that we can start the council process and get it to our ordinance committee in late winter, early spring, have them refer it to the town council early to mid-spring, depending on how many meetings the ordinance committee needs it for. And then it will go through that process. It will be referred to the planning board and then go back to the town council. And the last meeting date before July 1 is June 19th. So that was our target date to get it to the town council. So it's a big process in a short time frame to achieve it. But I think our timeline is not that unrealistic. It's just a lot of work for staff and committees to take on. So that's what I had planned very briefly this evening, which is good because I think we're running late on time, but I'm happy to, we can talk a bit if there are questions, and we'll get into it more. There we go. We'll get into it more in meetings in August and September, and I see that Maggie has a hand up.
Yes, could the ordinance that we were just talking about before about buffer zones and could there be any alignment with what you're trying to do? Would that be helpful for both?
Yeah, so the discussion from last month was that these are kind of two different timeframes that we're working on. We may be able to get the buffer requirements updated more quickly since that is just updating an existing ordinance. So the hope was to get some movement on that, probably, have something in place by the end of this calendar year, depending on council meeting schedules and things like that. Whereas this LID ordinance is a much longer process, more involved, and it's essentially a brand new ordinance. And that takes a lot longer, requires a lot more vetting.
Sure.
So I think that there will be alignment, but they're kind of two separate processes that are related.
Yes, and I would also love to see your slides.
Yeah,
Especially interested to educate myself on that slide showing all the wetlands and the areas in that are threatened.
Yeah, sure. The town watersheds, it is available in the town's GIS also
Oh, it
as a
is,
layer.
okay.
But yeah, I will include these as part of meeting follow-up and within
Okay,
the
that'd
meeting
be great.
minutes. So you'll definitely get them.
Pete, did you want to voice your chat remarks? No.
I don't have to. I don't want to take us back to the previous discussion of buffers. That can just go into the record.
All right.
Okay,
I
you
will
got
make sure
that?
Autumn sees those comments.
Okay, thanks. It's exciting, the low impact development ordinance planning process and movement. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of requirements of developers for plans once these are in place. But the good news is that there are many other developers who have done successful projects with low impact development requirements. And so there's lots of other sources for them to look to implement and build successful properties, and beautiful properties too, because they tend to be more green and healthy.
And I'll share also that there are 13 other towns in our area that are also required to pass an ordinance like this. So it's not like developers can threaten to leave Scarborough and go somewhere else.
That's good. Yeah.
This is going to be happening everywhere in our region. So that's helpful for us as well.
Yes, fantastic. Any other questions or discussion on this? Glad that we can play a role in this. So let's go to the education subcommittee. Rita has been working hard on a full program for the fall.
Sure. Just going to add a little bit to Marla's very, very detailed report. We do have 2 articles in process, and they're just now under review. We've asked Jamie and Randy to take a look at them and make any edits or additions that they might want. But those should be forthcoming fairly soon. Very happy to report that our speaker series is very much solidified at this point. We have dates and speakers, and also wanted to add that just in the last couple of days, Jamie has helped us put together a really colorful flyer for this series. And then we've also worked with Elsa at the Public Library this afternoon, and she's helped us set up a registration and a Zoom option on the library's website. And we will also be giving all of that, the flyers and other information, more detailed information about the talks themselves to all of our partners, the Land Trust, Friends of Scarborough Marsh, the library, and so forth, so that they can get that information out on their websites and on their social media sites. The other thing I just wanted to mention, as you can see here, Marla has listed quite a few articles that have been in the news recently about our 30 by 30 conservation resolution and the town's adoption of that resolution. The latest was just last week, I believe, out of the June 30th forecaster. Scarborough aims to conserve 30% of land by 2030 by Drew Johnson. So getting a lot of good press coverage on that.
Yeah, fantastic. Great work, Rita and Marla. Thank you so much. And we're going to have a lot to enjoy in the coming months that really intertwine with our work in a really fine way. So thank you. So next is Sustainable Scarborough Day, but I also wanted to make sure somewhere, whether it's town council or wherever, that we just touch on this formation of an ad hoc committee, open space ad hoc committee. But Jamie, did you have an update about Sustainable Scarborough Day?
Just that planning is still in process, and the planning committee was tasked with reaching out to their the folks they signed up to contact about participating. We're getting registration slowly in, but it's good that we'll have some folks to promote saying that they'll be at Sustainable Scarborough Day to give people a reason to join us as well. The committee meets again later on this week.
So we're looking at a variety of vendors and for information or workshops. So that's really great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Shoup can't be with us tonight, but I don't know if Jamie, you have any kind of update around what or guidance around how we should be thinking about ad hoc committee?
So I spoke with Karen very briefly last week, and she did not have much of an update other than to say that she and Jean Marie, I think, need to regroup since that the formation of the ad hoc committee wasn't approved at the same time as the resolution. So we do need, they need a council motion and action to form that committee. So the July 1 start date obviously is not going to happen. So we'll have to, I'll follow up to see what the time frame is for that, the formation of that committee.
Okay. Hopefully it comes up at the July meeting for the town council, and we'll have one, if it goes forward as planned. I understand we'll have one representative from the Conservation Commission on that ad hoc committee. And I'm aware of some initial interest from a member here, and if anybody else is interested, please be in touch. But otherwise, I think we'll have really great representation from the commission. I won't say quite yet, because we've got a few more steps to go in terms of having this committee formed and then formal agreement by the commissioner who wants to serve as a rep. Sustainability committee?
Sustainability committee is looking at really kind of doing some capacity building and hoping to have a dedicated budget for that group. So similar to how Conservation Commission was able to put in a capital improvement project request for the open space plan, Sustainability Committee will be looking at identifying a similar sustainability related project to request funding through the fiscal year 25 budget. Also looking at potentially establishing a line item in the engineering and technical services budget for sustainability initiatives to serve as, for example, match for grants that may come up that we don't know about as we're putting the budget together 6 months prior to when the budget actually needs to get passed. And then also they're likely going to propose a reserve account for more long-term projects that they may want to undertake. So that's kind of their main focus at the moment.
Reserve account certainly sounds smart.
It kind of like the conservation impact fee that this group's looking to establish, something similar for for sustainability.
Great. And Parks and Conservation Land Board, Jessica.
Well, I thank Andrew for giving the update on the last meeting where we did approve funding for the latest project, so I won't go into that in detail. After that recommendation, there's about 1.4 million left in the bonding capacity. So the PCLB is working on a letter to town council recommending that they consider issuing additional bonding capacity in the future. Date and amount TBD. Great. But sort of in meeting the goal of 30 by 30 and with only 1.4 left, there's going to need to be another bond. And hopefully they will move forward with that. So there's a draft floating, but we haven't finalized it yet to send it to town council. And tomorrow's meeting is canceled.
Oh, okay. All right.
That happened today.
Oh, okay. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 14. And I wonder, Autumn, is that a realistic timeline for us to look at a draft of a possible ordinance to work on?
Sure.
Wow.
It's a month.
It's
It's just a few red lines, right? It's just small.
Well, we'd be delighted to put something in motion and it's not like your summer is not busy or is whatever the sarcastic line was. Summers are busy. So thank you if that would be possible. Is there anything else that we want to talk about before we move to adjourn?
I'll just put in one more plug for the workshop next Monday at 5:30. The workshop's at 6. Oh, okay.
6.
Sorry, that's all right.
Our meetings are at 6:30.
Yeah, I was thinking it was an hour workshop. It's only half hour.
Just half hour.
Oh, easy.
Fast,
6 to 6:30. If
Yeah.
you want to learn more about chapter 419 and 420 are the town's current stormwater related ordinances. You can watch on Zoom also, I
Yes,
assume.
yes.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you just register through the planning board meeting link in the town calendar, and I can send that out also if that would be helpful.
So on the same agenda, Angela has quite a few additions to ordinances that are going to public hearing at planning board. We did the same thing last planning board meeting for LD 2003. We did a workshop so we could really talk about it, and then the public hearing was a lot easier to go through.
Got
Yeah,
it.
the 19 and 20 and council passed the updates and the new ordinance. It impacts all other land use development ordinances though, because we have to refer back to it. And so I was trying to give them a little background before they have to go into every other land use code to talk about. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Hey, Jamie, I thought about another thing that I'm seeing on Scarborough, Maine's Facebook page around the photo contest. Can you, or see your summer photos?
Yeah, so this was actually born out of Marla, Rita, Jessica, and Randy meeting with myself and Allison Carrier, our communications manager in town. Just trying to get people to kind of show why they love Scarborough and kind of build support for conserving these important spaces and areas that make Scarborough so special. So there is a summer photo contest happening now. There's a bunch of different categories. Allison is working on lining up gift card prizes for the winners, and you basically vote by likes. So the photos will be on Facebook and I think on Instagram. Go through, take a look at them, like the ones that you think are deserving of recognition. And then this will also help us have a good stash of photos to use in various outreach materials and things like that.
Yeah, they're pretty neat. Makes you proud to live here.
There's some really talented photographers in Scarborough. There's some really nice photos and also some funny ones like the cat in a harness.
On the leash, a cat on the leash on the beach.
I thought was kind of hilarious. Don't have to worry about that one chasing a plover, so we appreciate the efforts.
Anything else from folks? Motion to adjourn? Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank
Happy
you.
July.
Thank you. Great discussion.
Happy birthday, Rita.
Oh, thank you.